Welcome, everybody, to the Wednesday edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, Amanda Head, reporting to you from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C., and my co-host and Just the News editor-in-chief, John Solomon, is out on assignment tonight. And I have been needing to say this for a week now, since Charlie Kirk's assassination, and since we have seen wicked and vile hearts out there overflowing through people's mouths and out their fingertips into their keyboards. I'm just about a millimeter away from being a free speech absolutist. I'm very close to extreme on 1A. But here's the deal. We are living in a time when people are getting canned left and right for the vile stuff that they post on social media. And then they turn around and scream, "My free speech is under attack." So let's get one thing straight. There's a world of difference between free speech and inciting violence. And too many folks out there are deliberately blurring that line to play the victim. Free speech means that you can share your opinions, even the ones that make people roll their eyes or clutch their pearls. But when your posts are calling for harm, stirring up mobs, or spreading hate that puts people in danger, that's not just an opinion, that's incitement. And it's got no shield under the First Amendment. The Supreme Court's made that pretty clear since Brandenburg v. Ohio in 1969. So if your words are intended to provoke illegal activity or are likely to produce it, you're not waving the free speech flag, you are lighting a match. And let's talk about the workplace, because that's where this drama is playing out. In 28 states, right-to-work states, employers can fire you for any reason or for no reason at all. You could get the boot for wearing socks with sandals, posting a spicy meme, or just because your boss woke up grumpy. That's the deal. Freedom of speech means that we're not going to lock you up for things like they do in the UK, but when you get fired for a social media post that's got your boss's company's name trending for all the wrong reasons, you don't get to cry unfair when the law literally says your job isn't guaranteed. Companies aren't charities. They are not going to keep you on payroll when your online rants are scaring off customers or making the workplace toxic. That's not censorship, that's business. And don't even get me started on this whole, but it was my private social media account. That's nonsense. Social media is about as private as shouting your psychotic takes in the middle of a crowded mall. You're posting on platforms designed to broadcast your thoughts to the world, or at least your 500 followers, their friends, and anyone who knows how to take a screenshot. That private setting, it is a flimsy lock on a glass door. Your coworkers, your boss, or some random internet sleuth can still see what you are saying, especially when it's vile enough to get shared, retweeted, or plastered on a news site. So thinking your private account is something, some sacred, untouchable diary, it's like thinking that whispering in a group chat stays between you and the void. Social media is public by design, and acting shocked when your posts come back to bite you is just willful ignorance. But here's what really gets me. The folks shouting the loudest about free speech these days, free speech being violated, half of them didn't give a damn about free speech until it was their job that was on the line. Where were they when other people, conservatives, whistleblowers, the 45th and 47th president were getting silenced or punished for speaking out? Nowhere to be found. And now, suddenly, they're constitutional scholars because their tweet about taking back the streets or some other dog whistle nonsense got them in hot water. It's not about principle, it's about convenience. They want a get-out-of-jail-free card for saying whatever they want, no matter how dangerous, and they're mad that the world isn't playing along anymore. And the truth is, free speech isn't a blank check. It never has been. You can say what you want, but you don't get a free pass from consequences, especially when your words cross into inciting violence or harm. And if you're in one of those 28 right-to-work states, your boss doesn't even need a good excuse to show you the door. So maybe, just maybe, think twice before you hit that post button on that rant, because the only thing lacking here isn't freedom of speech, it's your common sense. All right, so time for us to change gears just a little bit. Let's talk now about where some of those social media posts are coming from. And I'm not talking about the people who are posting them this time. I'm talking about where they got those ideas about Charlie and conservatives in the first place. Part of what inspired those posts came from our own government, who for years were smearing conservatives and religious Christians in America as domestic terrorists. Just the News's own Jerry Dunleavy has a story about that up on justthenews.com right now. So let's bring him on to talk about just how the government under the Biden administration worked to paint conservatives as terrorists. Jerry, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Jerry, so while the Biden administration was casting people who went to Latin Mass or lawfully owned guns or were somewhere in the vicinity of Capitol Hill on January 6th, while they were investigating those people, calling them vile names, sending out intelligence community memos for basically bolos for these types of people, they were turning a blind eye to people like Tyler Robinson and people who were actually planning on committing violence.
I mean, here's the problem right now. Charlie Kirk was just assassinated by what all evidence currently indicates was a left-wing shooter who was motivated because he believed that Charlie Kirk's, I think, very reasonable stances on transgenderism in the view of the shooter were hateful. That's what we know about the shooter, and that's what we know about what has motivated him. On top of that, the shooter's ammunition included inscriptions that were sort of Antifa-style inscriptions, including one that said, "Hey, fascists, catch," right? When a shooting like this happens, I want to know, what is the domestic terrorism threat picture right now? And were our law enforcement agencies operating based on an accurate threat picture? And what I can unfortunately say is that it is not clear. At least we cannot turn to the government currently for an accurate assessment of what the current domestic terrorism threat picture is in the United States, as we want to figure out what's going on in the wake of Charlie Kirk's shooting, because the Biden administration spent 4 years politicizing intelligence and muddling this domestic terrorism threat picture. And probably the biggest example of this, and I want listeners to follow along here. Obviously, January 6th, Capitol riot happens January 6th, 2021. And what the Biden administration did quietly, without telling us, because we only found this out once Trump became president again, and this information was declassified. But what the Biden administration quietly did was they took these hundreds, really thousands of cases related to January 6th, and they classified them individually as instances of domestic terrorism. And they used those inflated numbers to talk about this massively inflated domestic terrorism threat in the United States, specifically a massively growing domestic terrorism threat from the right. And they used that to implement a new nationwide domestic terrorism strategy and to implement a host of other initiatives. And this is also what they turned the focus of our law enforcement on. The problem here is that we only found out once Trump was president and information was declassified, that what they had done was, for instance, by 2022, so a year after the Capitol riot, there was something like 3,000 domestic terrorism cases that the FBI was looking into. That's a big number, and the Biden administration was running around talking about that number, but what they weren't talking about was the fact that 61% of all of the domestic terrorism cases that the FBI was looking into at that time, so 1,800 out of 3,000, were actually just cases connected to January 6th. A few hours of rioting and out of control protesting on one day. And that inflation drove FBI policy and law enforcement policy for 4 years. And you also saw it with the FBI and DOJ's focus on protesting parents, the Defense Department's stand down order, trying to quote unquote root out extremism in the ranks. All of these things kind of flowed from January 6th and from the Biden administration's focus on the right wing. And unfortunately, a lot of those numbers are just inflated and don't paint an accurate picture. So right now, when we're dealing with a politically motivated assassination, probably the biggest politically motivated assassination in many decades against Charlie Kirk, we don't have a good threat picture right now. And it's because of 4 years of politicization by the Biden administration.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying to think about, and I want to ask you about the terror aspect going forward as far as what organizations maybe we should look out for and their associations. But looking back at the Biden administration, I mean, it obviously was the FBI and the DOJ, but does it also loop in, I mean, the ATF, the NSA? How many agencies do we think were politicized to this degree? Because these agencies are supposed to operate independently, but I have no doubt that they were of one mind when it came to the Biden administration's priorities, when it came to essentially demonizing conservatives.
Yeah, I mean, let's look at these big examples, because I think these are worth diving into more deeply. So you had the inflation of our domestic terrorism numbers because of January 6th and the Biden administration's decision there. That then drove FBI and DOJ policy to focus on the right wing and Republicans and conservatives. So you saw this then play out. You saw it play out with Merrick Garland's school board's memo, which was itself based on a letter that the National School Boards Association had written in consultation with the Biden White House, by the way. And that NSBA letter called upon the DOJ to investigate protesting parents at school board meetings, people who were protesting, these schools pushing sort of radical left-wing ideologies to their kids. That letter from NSBA called upon DOJ to investigate those parents as domestic terrorists and perhaps to even deploy the Patriot Act against them. Now, this is a crazy letter that a reasonable Justice Department, when it received it, would very calmly and very politely place it in the shredder. But instead, based on that letter, Attorney General Merrick Garland penned his own memo calling on the FBI and the DOJ to look into protesting parents. And we saw that play out. We saw the FBI field offices try to implicate Catholics as being connected to right-wing violent extremism and terrorism. And by the way, basing the FBI's field office, basing its own memos on extreme, crazy left-wing articles from places like The Atlantic and Salon. I mean, this is not particularly careful work. This was work that was being done based on extreme left-wing inputs to go after right-wingers. And I mentioned the DOD aspect of this, in the wake of January 6th, and with the Biden Pentagon pointing to January 6th, Secretary Lloyd Austin ordered a stand down inside the U.S. military in 2021, ordering them to look into and try to root out extremism. Now, this stand down happened in the summer of 2021, at the same time that the Biden administration really should have been focused on making sure that we didn't screw up our withdrawal from Afghanistan. Their eye was off the ball. They were focused on pretty much anything else but getting that withdrawal right. They got it wrong, and I think we're still paying the price for it. And so these decisions by the Biden administration to politicize intelligence and to focus almost exclusively on the right wing, I think took the FBI's eye off the ball. It took the Pentagon's eye off the ball. It had them focusing on Republicans when we should have been focusing on every threat. Because this is not to say that there is no domestic terrorism threat from people that consider themselves on the right. It's just that it's not the sole place that we should be focusing on. There's a lot of problems with radical Islamic extremist terrorism, left-wing terrorism. These are problems that we need to look at soberly and judiciously, but the Biden administration was looking at them politically. And we're paying the price, because I think that for 4 years, our eye was off the ball. We don't know how these networks have advanced over the past 4 years. And I think that, unfortunately, this new FBI and the new FBI director, because of 4 years, I think, being largely wasted, they're going to be kind of flat-footed. There's 4 years of work that should have been being done that wasn't, and that now we have to play a lot of catch-up.
Yeah, I mean, they're behind the 8 ball. So when it comes to tackling, I don't even know if it would necessarily be surveillance, but for the FBI keeping an eye on a domestic terrorist group like they have in the past with the KKK, with Weather Underground, Republic of New Africa, Black Panthers, whatever. How should we handle it when we have a subsect of American society who, I mean, look, there's a pattern. I don't think anyone can deny what is happening with the trans community when it comes to these shootings and violence. But you've got this group out of Salt Lake City, Armed Queers SLC. I mean, even just the imagery of their group is quite militant. So how should the FBI handle groups like this? Should there be heightened surveillance for groups like this? What does that look like?
So, first I just want to, just put in the fact that this Marxist-Leninist radical trans group called Armed Queers has not been implicated at this time in Charlie Kirk shooting or anything like that. However, as we take a step back and just kind of look at some of the problems facing the United States, there are large financial networks, left-wing networks that are funding a lot of radical groups that, by their own words, wants to bring communist revolution to the United States. And this is not me putting words in their mouth. This is what they say they want to do. This Armed Queers group is but one example, and perhaps is an interesting case study in what a lot of these sort of radical groups that seem to be in the space of Marxist, Leninist, Antifa-style groups, what these groups are up to. So Armed Queers is a radical trans liberation group, Marxist and Leninist in its own words, just got back from what's called a May Day Brigade trip to Cuba, which is a trip to Cuba that is put on in coordination with the Cuban government and, frankly, with Cuban intelligence, where people from the United States and around the world, radicals from the United States and around the world, go to Cuba in solidarity with the communist revolution there. And while they are there, the Cuban government works to indoctrinate them further to come back to the United States or their other, the rest of the world, to bring the revolution back. And that is what, in the words of the Armed Queers leaders, they came back inspired to do, is to bring the revolution back here. And what I will say is to look into all of these groups. We as journalists, let's put aside, obviously the FBI and law enforcement need to be doing a lot, but we as journalists, part of what we need to be doing here is looking at the finances and the backing and the networks, because there's a lot of coordination and a lot of money flowing among and in between these groups. And one piece of the financial network that I always say people need to take a look at is Neville Singham, who is a wealthy Marxist businessman who's currently based out of China, self-described Maoist and communist, backing a lot of these groups from the People's Forum.
Follow the money.
And that money flowing to a lot of left-wing groups around the country.
Follow the money, as Kash Patel said, and as a lot of us have said. Jerry Dunleavy, Chief Investigative Correspondent here at Just the News. Thanks so much for joining me tonight. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back on the other side.